Excellent. Thank you so much. First, I would like to bring on John Weibel. John is our political consultant. He has over 30 years of community organizing, political consulting, and creative direction experience. He has worked for most major Democratic elected leaders in Washington state, including Maria Cantwell, who's on the ballot this fall, Jay Inslee, Adam Smith, and Derek Kilmer, who has been a ranked choice voting champion. John is the only creative director in Washington state to have won both a Reed Award for Best Local Political Television Ad and an American Association of Political Consultants Polly Award for Best Local Direct Mail. John has run organizing programs in New Jersey, Iowa, California, New Hampshire, and right here in Washington state. Thanks for being with us, John. Next, I want to bring on Stephanie Houghton. Stephanie is originally from Massachusetts, and although she has spent the past few years hopscotching across the country, working for candidates at every level of government, she had found herself in South Carolina in 2020 as Elizabeth Warren's operations director, and also as Michelle DeLisa's campaign manager in Kansas for her second congressional district. As a woman of field, Stephanie has been dedicated to increasing turnout through one-on-one conversations and community organizing. And when she's not knocking doors or making calls, she's probably browsing cookbooks or hiking with her dog Zinnia. Welcome, Stephanie. And last but never least, our very own political director, Nilu Jenks. You know her, you love her. Nilu is a dedicated community advocate who loves to engage with and serve her community. As the second generation Iranian American whose family was granted asylum in the United States, she is a strong believer in democratic reform. A mother of two, Nilu became a strong fan of ranked choice voting through her work with climate advocacy groups. Thanks for joining our conversation, Nilu. Appreciate you. All right, so you all know you're here to talk about the election. I think I have pulled together a team of people who might be qualified to talk about elections. Here's hoping. The first question will be for you, Stephanie. Voting ends in 13 days. Our ballots are out here in Washington. They're out across the country. I know my parents just early voted today in Wisconsin. The election's happening. So many people and campaigns have different aspirations riding on the results of this election. How do you see the election results at the national and statewide level impacting ranked choice voting?
Sure. Well, thank you. Thank you for that introduction, and also thank you for the question. So yes, voters are voting. This is an exciting, I feel like I've been waiting for voters to start voting for an age. So I'm excited to be here. So I think there are a couple of different, like, this has been a wild campaign season. A lot of unprecedented things have happened already. So what am I looking at as far as like how these elections will affect ranked choice voting? I think one thing that has been steady for a long time, but definitely has come into focus this year, is voters are not happy with their options. That's true in Washington state. That is true in the country as a whole. It's true in the Democratic Party. It's true in the Republican Party. Voters in general, not psyched about this situation. So for me, I'm interested to see kind of how that ends up playing out this year. And something that I think ranked choice voting does is we provide like an option for folks to like think outside the box, like to think outside the candidate. How can we make this different? How can we actually take our democracy in our hands and like, you know, actually find some good representation? So I'm looking at sort of how can the results at the national level, at the governor level, sort of carry our message, which is this worked out well, it did not work out well. Were you happy with your choices? Were you unhappy with your choices? All of those will be questions we can ask voters. But then I'm also, of course, looking at ranked choice voting is on the ballot in a lot of places across the country. Open primaries, which is something that Washington was ahead of the game on, it is also on the ballot across the country. Looking at the state of Nevada, for example, they're not just doing ranked choice voting. They first have to open their primaries, allow all of the independents to vote, because right now they can't, and then they can rank in the general. And that's a little bit different than what's happening in Oregon. Alaska's trying to repeal their ranked choice voting rules. So there's a lot to kind of keep an eye on. But I think in the end, it's going to come back to us in this movement, going back to voters and saying, how did this feel for you? Was 2024 good? Did you like the system? If you didn't, then come learn more with us. Like come see the opportunities that ranked choice voting provides.
Incredible. Thank you so much. I think I want to hone in now a little bit more on Washington State and how these election results might impact what we're doing at FairVote Washington. John, can you speak a little bit to um, what's going on here in Washington um, at the election level and how that will impact ranked choice voting?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a number of statewide uh, elected offices, and then there's 4 initiatives that are going on, and then the whole House of Representatives is up, and half of the Senate is up. So there is a lot going on. There's some Supreme Court justices, and we've been really building the political program at FairVote, and Nilu and Stephanie and a whole cadre of volunteers have put together a questionnaire. We got a questionnaire out. We've endorsed a number of candidates that responded positively to the questionnaire and are really working to build a sort of new group of ranked choice voting champions going into the legislative session next winter.
Incredible. That is so exciting to hear. Nilu, I would love for you to expand a little bit more about what is FairVote Washington's role in these elections and how did we decide to get involved?
Yeah, so the first step, a question I got a few times is, why was this person not endorsed? I heard they like ranked choice voting. So first step is they actually have to fill out our endorsement questionnaire. I mailed out 4 reminders. People got a lot of reminders, and just in case, there was also a form on the website, so which you can still find actually. And so that was where we first started. And then looking through and if needing to follow up with phone calls with some of the candidates and just really being very responsible. For me, it was really important knowing that a lot of you have donated to our organization. And I think it's important to remember that when we are endorsing and encouraging you to vote for someone or, think about that person or what you might want to do to support them, that felt like a heavy responsibility, and making sure that they were somebody that wanted to be a champion and really cared about this issue, because there's a lot of issues going on. And the other part of it is really like when people are running for office, they're much better listeners somehow. So engaging with them and making sure they understand the issue, because they also become messengers for the issue for ranked choice voting too. So I made sure to have a very educational form. That was something that was important to me as a former candidate, and also made sure that it was easy for them because they get a lot, well over 100. And then making sure that I'm watching out for our supporters so they know who they can put their support behind. Yeah, and I will throw out that, we know you're not single issue voters, but that's on you to figure out what other issues are. There's too many things for us to track. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think you talked about some really important things, and I even want to take one more step back and talk about what is an endorsement and why is it so important for us in building a political program and really embracing our role in politics as an organization. And I'm going to pitch that to the group. But Neela, you can start.
All right, I have 2 people who have a lot of experience who can correct me where I go wrong. Well, endorsement is just saying, hey, this is somebody that we vetted. They have submitted this questionnaire and their answers. We've gone through them. We vetted them a little bit on this issue, and made sure that they're responsible, or like have a strong campaign. They, have a chance of winning, or, are really passionate and are speaking about this issue quite a lot. And it's saying, hey, you get this beautiful democracy champion logo that you get to put on your material, and you get to speak about this issue as well and say you've been endorsed. And for really competitive races, or for people who really are just really out there and doing great, it can include a contribution. So that's a pretty sweet deal, I'd say. But yeah, that's generally what you're thinking about when you think endorsements. Stephanie and John, I left you plenty of room to add things.
Well, I think one of the things was interesting because we have this is the first time we've done independent campaigning for candidates outside of just doing endorsements or just giving a contribution. And I think one of the things it does for the candidates, it says that they feel like the system is broken, even though they're participating in it, that this isn't working for them. They're going to do the best they can to be elected in the system, but they would like to see a system that works better. And I think that helps those candidates actually connect with voters, right? Who definitely feel like this thing is broken and that it needs fixed. So I feel like we add both the value of, not just, they're for ranked choice voting and they're, but also that it kind of says we'd like to see less negative campaigning. We'd like to see increased turnout. We'd like to see increased civic participation. We'd like to see more people running for office. All that resonates with voters. So I think we provide a lot of value to these candidates when we endorse them.
I think they covered it. I don't need to add.
A question for Carrie, because there was actually one other thing we did that John touched on is you went and knocked doors. And I know
We
that
sure did.
good for, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, what I get excited about with politics and with working as an organizer, but also supporting this political program is that when I think of elections, I think of it as just a lot of teamwork. The candidates need us as much as we need them. We need to champion the candidates who are going to support our issues, but they also need voters who are going to go and champion them at the ballot box. And in that mix is organizations who are dedicated to working on topics like FairVote Washington is dedicated to working on ranked choice voting and towards proportional ranked choice voting. So it really is like a symbiotic experience and symbiotic relationship between all of these parties. So yeah, I'd love to talk about what we did at the doors. Talking to a voter one-on-one, face-to-face, is the single most effective way to help educate a person about a topic and an issue. And it's also the single most effective way to turn them out to vote. So twice this year, we engaged volunteers to go talk to our priority candidates in districts where higher voter turnout and electing a ranked choice voting champion would really have some of the most impact. And we went and we talked to voters, and it's a really fun experience. I often describe it much like exercising. It's really hard to start, but once you are out there doing it, you're really glad that you are doing it, and you always feel better afterwards. So I'll just leave that there. But yes, it's been really fun to be able to support the political landscape that makes up Washington by engaging at the volunteer, at that grassroots level, and building out that support for candidates. Thank you. So I think that also probably ties back into a little bit of what the purpose of endorsements are, because it's FairVote Washington saying we are going to stand behind these people because we want our landscape to look like this, which is we want a landscape that is filled with elected officials who are ready to go to bat for ranked choice voting and help voters understand that it doesn't have to be this way, and also help other legislators understand that it doesn't have to be this way. So thank you. Thanks for the question, Nilu. I think I've maybe answered a couple of my own questions in here. Stephanie and John and Nilu, all three of you. I just gave a long monologue about politics and organizations and volunteers and all these different things. But if I broaden that picture a little bit to think about just the movement of ranked choice voting and what we're doing here at FairVote Washington, specifically in Washington State, what are some of the most effective ways we can be organizing around ranked choice voting in this moment? John, you're nodding, so I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think it's a lot of the things that we've been doing, and you can kind of talk about this window that we're in, and the candidates that we're supporting. But in the long run, it is there's auditors that are going to be up in the future in a couple years, and that's a whole organizing potential there. There's obviously a whole legislative session that's coming up, and figuring out where those pressure points are, who those legislators are that need to be flipped, who, whether it's the Secretary of State, or legislators or whoever it is, making sure that our organizing team is ready to go and getting the phone calls and the letters and the emails into those folks. So that's all coming in this 2 weeks. We've been doorbelling, we're getting out independent expenditures for the first time, we're giving out checks, we're working with these candidates. That's all positive. We see there's kind of a year-round cycle of accountability in a sense, where we do this election period and then we do that lobbying period, but all of it is geared toward accountability of elected officials. That there are some elected officials who may say nice things on our questionnaire, and then we find out in the legislature that they were just saying nice things to get our support and weren't really there. So we have to do the whole year of accountability. We have to then measure their performance after the legislative session. So it's a year-round project to keep that cycle of accountability going through the whole year, so we're constantly moving forward. So there's just a ton of, unfortunately, there's a ton of work to be done.
Stephanie, feel free to jump in. You're unmuted.
I guess I was just going to say that, yeah, like John is saying, even though ranked choice voting is not, as far as I know, on anyone's ballot in Washington this year, there's still a lot of support that can be given in Washington this year. And one of the things that, I sort of think about in Washington is that sometimes it can feel, even if we really love a candidate, it can feel a little bit like, oh, I don't have a lot of like choices, right? Like I've only got these two that I can pick from, and this one's definitely going to win. So, okay. But I think something that it would be helpful in Washington is also just to sort of, they are still eager to hear from voters. Like Nilu said, like they're very good listeners when they're running for office. And this is an opportunity, as you're talking to voters and being out on the doors and thinking this through, is like, not everyone, I know I'm going to like really shock some people here, but like not everyone immediately thinks of democracy reform as their number one issue, but they think of something, and this was in Nilu's introduction, like people are very worried about climate change. Things are not getting done on climate change. So how can we bring those two things together? Well, ranked choice voting encourages a more cooperative government because it encourages more cooperative campaigning. And like, how can we, so maybe you're out on the doors working for a candidate, ranked choice voting isn't at the top of their list, but maybe it's something that you can sort of say like, oh, well, you're running on, a climate platform. Like, let me talk to a voter about climate, because that's what this candidate wants me to do. And also, just so you know, like when you hear about ranked choice voting, this is what it is, and this is how it will affect this thing you care about. So I know that we're also out on the doors and we are out there talking about ranked choice voting, but the beauty of ranked choice voting is that it really can touch all of these other issues. And I would challenge the people on this call to think about how they would bring that into a conversation this year, talking to their fellow voters, talking to their friends and family. People are up in arms about issues, and like, okay, ranked choice voting really can be an answer to a lot of those.
Thank you. And Nilu, you had unmuted. Do you like to add anything?
I was just going to remind everyone, you're our partners. Send your emails, push them, tell them. Did you apply for endorsement? Like whatever, like, do you support ranked choice voting? Like if they don't hear it from you, they don't know. So we're here, and I really do view everyone in the audience as extremely important partners. I mean, we wouldn't exist if it weren't for everybody that is supporting this work. And so I thank you for reaching out to candidates, honestly, and especially keep that in mind, past this election. I just was at a great talk where somebody said democracy happens between elections. So I know we're talking about the election going forward, but like, don't drop that ball, I hope you'll be there with us.
The best is yet to come, is what I heard. I think in all of this, there's clearly an undertone. We're talking about elections, we're talking about politics, we're talking about endorsements. This is new for FairVote Washington. We haven't done explicit endorsements before. And I'd like to talk a little bit about why. Like, why are we, why now, why this election, why are we pursuing it this way? So Nilu, why is FairVote Washington embracing a more political role? And why are we hopeful for this strategy development?
I was thinking about it when I read your question earlier, and we are inherently asking for political change here. We're asking for something that requires them, our legislators and our council members, to move on something they may not want to. They won in this system, right? And it can be hard for them. And I think that it's incumbent on us to bring that political pressure to move them and say, we are watching you, like John said, like a cycle of accountability. If we don't do that, the reality is there are a lot of demands. Like Stephanie says, there's so many people asking for demands, and it's actually really hard, I think, for electoral reform, democracy reform to rise up as a top issue, even if it is the most important, groundwork issue for everything. I do think people are starting to realize that, as we apply for things or go to opportunities, democracy is showing up as a bucket of things to sign up for, which is exciting on my end. But that's part of this work, and it's also part of the atmosphere that we're living in now. But I think that's why it's really important, is because they need pushing and reminding. Like, without political power, that building that structure in us, somebody else is going to have it, and they're going to listen to that somebody else for good reason, because they're human beings. Like the squeaky wheel gets the oil. It's not even evil, it's not bad, it's just the reality is that you have to be willing to apply a little pressure, effectively, kindly. It doesn't have to be mean. We are the not negative campaigning people, right? But so I think that's why it's just really important to make sure that you have a way to capture their attention and hold it and show that you have people that also care about it. I don't know if Stephanie and Johnny have stuff to add. Yeah.
That's totally right. Like everything you just said, and something that has been helpful to me thinking about this is we're really talking about changing incentives here. We're changing the incentives of the structure, but they haven't changed yet. So we still have to participate. These elected officials, and I've worked for so many of them, and every single one, no matter how safe their seat is very worried they're going to lose their next election. And that is the entire way that they govern. So we need to participate in that system and invite them to be part of our team. But first, we've got to have a team. And that's where everyone on this call comes in. And that is through donations to us, donations to them, knocking on doors with us, knocking on doors with them, but really showing up in these numbers so that we tell them, first of all, there's a little bit of there are a lot of us, you should be worried, but there's also there are a lot of us, come hang out with us. It's both of those things at once. And that's the power of a political movement, as opposed to something that's more just we have a really exciting idea and we can't wait to tell you about it, which is also true for us. We also do that. And I mean, that's why I'm here. I just love that idea. I love this. So I think that's also important, is both.
Sorry, John, I don't know if you have something to add, but I did just one thought I did want to throw in is, because part of our work is changing the legislature, bringing in new candidates who may embrace this reform a little more, they need our support even more. They don't have the, all these other orgs that they've been able to show up for before, just again, not out of anybody being bad, they need that extra boost from us. And so there's so many new candidates that I'm who would be new to the legislature, that was really exciting to endorse. They really wanted to send money and doorbellers, just because otherwise it's just harder for them, and we're asking for something new. So let's bring people who are excited about that, especially young candidates. I think just a lot there. I won't go any deeper unless you guys want to add something there, but I'm gonna let my cat in because she's losing her mind. I'm so sorry. If she weren't losing her mind so badly.
Well, we'll just let John talk for a little bit while
I'll
the
cover
cat gets
for
handled.
the cat. Yeah.
Cover for the cat. Appreciate
Yeah.
it.
No, I love what Nilu said about the candidates that are running this year for the first time. It's really exciting. I feel like a lot of the candidates that we endorse this year, they're new to the political process. And what's cool about that is they're going through it and they're incredibly frustrated, just like voters are, about the way the process worked and the way it feels kind of rigged and the negativity in it and the kind of musical chairs thing where they don't feel like they can work with the other candidates and the other candidates are the enemy and all that feeling. It makes it easier to get champions at the beginning who then can go in the legislature and be like, I don't like the way this process worked. I know some of you like it because you got elected this way. For those people who got elected that way, it's kind of why did we get involved in the political process? The answer to that is the folks who've been there. They're used to a certain way that things happen. They talk about when they're working on a bill that there's stakeholders involved in the bill, right? And if we're not stakeholders, we're outside that process. If we aren't considered stakeholders and that we come to the table with a set of ideas and a set of organizational abilities to talk to a bunch of voters, we're left out of that process. So we're kind of doing both things at once, right? We're getting these new folks who are incredibly frustrated because they're seeing it for the first time and are alarmed, like many of us, about the tone and nature of politics. And then those folks who've been there for a long time, we're being part of that process and we're showing them, we'll work with you. We know some of you aren't there, but we will work to get you there. And we feel like that multifaceted approach is going to move us toward ranked choice voting faster than just being informational or just providing and just, I think Carrie said it best when she was like, hey, this is a really good idea. We're going to have to do more than, hey, this is a really good idea to get these folks there. We just are.
It's true. And in my sort of like super basic understanding of political organizing and why we are working at this level is also just for the simple fact that we're trying to change the tipping point of who's going to vote yes to pass a ranked choice voting bill. And sometimes the math is just as simple as that. We need a few more people who are going to be champions for it to get their friends excited. We know that the best messenger for something is the person who likes it the most. So having more people who are really excited about it, and then just having more people who will vote yes. There's so many tendrils of information to go down, but it's also sometimes just maybe that simple. It's not. Politics is never that simple. All right. So thanks for answering that. I want to scope out a little bit back to I have one more just like hyper political question. John, you talked about how we're doing independent expenditures for the first time this year. I want to like raise a little jargon giraffe icon and ask you to explain to anybody who might not know what an independent expenditure is and what we do with it and why it's important.
Yeah. Well, there's a simple process in endorsements, right? To endorse a candidate. Nilu talked about our graphic that they all get. That's like, champion of democracy graphic. So they've been putting that all up. All our endorsed candidates have that on their website and are putting it out in their mail, and that's great. And then we're giving direct contributions. The third thing that we can do is, outside of their campaign, we can do independent work as long as we don't coordinate with the campaign. So we can do, text on their behalf. We can do direct mail on their behalf. We can do auto dial calls on their behalf. So we can do all that, but we can't coordinate in any way with the candidate and they can't coordinate with us. So we are doing those projects for the first time this year where we're supporting candidates without doing any coordination with the campaign.
Thank you.
And they don't know. I want to like, and it's not like we say, by the way, this is happening,
The support will happen and we'll kind of be like, surprise, we're helping you.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
It's like getting a nice gift at your doorstep, really.
Exactly.
Yes. Like the time I sent pastries to my friend, but I sent it to the wrong address. So her neighbor got them instead.
Yeah. It was very independent.
Yeah. It was very independent. We did not coordinate. Clearly, I sent them to the wrong place. So
We'll try. We're going in the right district with the right thing. We're not sending it to the neighbor.
She did get a free fridge out of it though, so
Oh, there we go.
all's well that ends well. All right. We've been getting some really great questions from the audience, and so I kind of want to pivot over to those. First, we have just a question. These get a little bit broader. They're a little bit less about this election. So I'll just preface that if anybody does have more questions about what our elections are looking like, what we can be doing here at FairVote Washington to support the outcomes we want to see, please put them in the Q&A. Appreciate it. We have a question from Anonymous who's asking, will ranked choice voting work in rural areas and or outside of Seattle? And I just want to start with a very big nod to that. I'm going to steal some of your thunder, Stephanie. Stephanie is currently in Idaho working to pass a ballot initiative. So yes. So Stephanie, I'll kick it to you first.
Sure. Thank you, Carrie. Blowing my cover. Gosh. Yeah, in my experience, so one of the bills that we've worked on in the past is ranked choice voting in presidential primaries. And this is true for Republicans and Democrats, this is just a thing that we are working on. So 2016, you may recall, there were, I believe it was 17 people vying for the Republican nomination. 2020, I believe there were 23 Democrats vying for the nomination. And what happened, not what could happen, but what did happen in 2020 was a lot of folks, especially in rural areas of Washington, got their ballot, filled it out, mailed it in, and then a whole bunch of people dropped out, including my girl, Elizabeth Warren. And those votes were just tossed. And this is, we find in my experience, especially true in rural areas where perhaps you're not as close to a drop box, you're not as close to your post office, you're sort of going into town, running errands, coming back out. You're just going to do it earlier. You're just going to vote earlier. And so in this way, it would definitely work. And I would actually argue help in rural areas where maybe folks are trying to vote early. And just so I can kind of close the loop on that with ranked choice voting, if you had ranked Elizabeth Warren first, your ballot could still have counted towards people who were still in the race. There were 3 Democrats still in the race by the time Washington's election day came around. So I think yes, it's a really good and important question. One thing that we've kind of danced around a little bit, but I will just say is we've been talking about door knocking and organizing. It can be easier, and it is certainly tempting to talk about door knocking in high density districts. FairVote Washington tries really hard to organize in rural areas as well. And we would love to talk about kind of what that looks like. And that goes back to what Nilu was saying, tell us what that means in your district. And we would be happy to be more intentional and work with you directly on that as well.
Thank you.
I'm going to add something here about Kitsap County. So, it's outside of Seattle, right? And I think it has some rural areas. And they had a county commissioner race for the primary. Over 50% of people voted for 3 Democratic candidates. And there were 2 Republican candidates and who got less than the majority of the votes. And they're going to have only 2 Republicans on their ballot because the Democrats split the 56% in such a way, 56 or 58, whatever it was over 50%. And so they're trying a write-in campaign right now. But I can't say that I think that reflects the will of voters to have, not a single Democratic candidate move forward. And this is not, a partisan issue. It's just how the voters voted. Actually, a similar thing happened in our Commissioner of Public Lands race. I don't know if people pay attention to that race. That was a statewide race where we had 5 Democratic candidates and 2 Republicans, and we had by 49 votes, I think, a Democrat advance, even though they had like 56% of the vote. We nearly had 2 Republicans advance on our statewide ballot. So it did actually happen, a party lockout in Kitsap County, to speak a little bit to, you know, outside of Seattle, and statewide, we nearly had that happen. And we've had that happen in different races throughout the state where there have been party lockouts. And so ranked choice voting would not let that happen. You could, we could have a top 5, advance more people to the general, and you rank them, and people get to express their vote and their priorities and not worry about splitting the vote in spoilers. And I think that really, a lot of people felt impacted by that. So yes, ranked choice voting absolutely can work in other parts of the state and help voters. And again, it's not a partisan issue. There are lockouts in both directions. Actually, there was, by I think 100 votes in another district where the Republicans nearly got locked out. So I hope that helps with that answer too. That question rather.
So I think it depends on what your definition of works, how it works. There's no question, because there's been studies done, that it increases turnout, that it reduces negative campaigning, that it increases civic participation and gets more candidates to run. If the minute you put an ideological sort of bent into it, it depends on your ideology of whether it works for you or not. But if you're in a minority in ranked choice voting, you see exactly where you are. You see, and so even if you lose that election, you see where you can build from, and you see candidates that are like you, that did as well as you. You see where the other side has done well. It's a clearer picture. I do a lot of candidate political consulting, right? So from that perspective, I think it works better even if you lose, because you can see more clearly where you stand with the electorate, in a way that the sort of musical chairs, especially in Washington, top 2, it's very hard to read, if you're in a certain ideological spectrum, where you actually landed. And it can seem like either a complete failure or an incredible success, despite what voters thought, because of the way the candidates were positioned, or because of the way the wind was blowing that year. So in that way, it doesn't matter whether it's Capitol Hill or Ritzville, Washington. I think it will work better for the voters.
And that is really what it comes down to. I mean, ranked choice voting, we know, doesn't favor any party. It favors the voters. Is there a party of the voters? There probably should be one. It's called ranked choice voting. Made it up.
It's a good idea, the Voters Party.
Voters Party. I think I have my first 3 members right here. Thank
Yeah,
you. Speaking of voters and we all as community members and constituents, we have a question from Skip asking how effective our lobby day in Olympia is, like how effective it was, I guess, and how effective it will be going forward. And I won't answer that. I just plan it. I don't decide what its efficacy is.
I'll just say really quickly that before I even worked for FairVote Washington, I was at a meeting with a representative who opened with, "Who's even asking for this?" And it's really great if, when asked that question, I can say, "Oh, remember that lobby day where we had 70 people show up? It's them." And those are just the people who could come. So lobby day is effective in that sort of like, that's kind of like a black and white, like, yes, there were people here and it was good way. But, and I'm sure like John and Nilu will be more articulate than I'm being right now, but like that really is extraordinarily helpful on lobby day and beyond.
John, go for it. Thank you.
Well, I've only been around the last couple of years, but each year the legislation has gotten farther and farther, and last year the lobby day was, was well attended. It's hard sometimes to figure out exactly which levers are working and which ones are not, but I think that was key to and all the work that was done around the hearing, all that really provided a lot of juice for pushing the legislation that we're working on along. I would highly recommend that we keep doing that and we keep building on that, that we build all these tools and get stronger and stronger, because there are some recalcitrant legislators and policymakers and elected officials all over the state who got elected under the system we're in and are not sure they want to, they're playing checkers. I don't know if they want to play chess, right? Like they're like, I'm pretty good at checkers. Okay. So I just like it to stay checkers and I don't want it to get more complicated. That's their take on it. So we just have the work to do. And the lobby day is a huge, huge piece of that. So I think it was incredibly successful, and it's just illustrative by how far the legislation got last year.
Absolutely. And I think to Stephanie's point about who is even asking for this, we have people from 33 legislative districts and a total of 76 people. That's not nobody.
Right.
That's not nobody. And if anybody remembers, there was like an ice storm the day before and the morning of. So we really did not have the best weather conditions. Whoever wrote Washington's Constitution and decided when the legislative session would be clearly didn't take into consider climate change. But we're doing our best. So thank you. Go ahead, Nilu.
You as farmers maybe needed, like when they had the winter off. I read somewhere once, I think. But I wanted to take a little bit of a different tack because Stephanie and John addressed, some really big reasons. But I know it keeps my spirits up. It shows me that you're going to show up and be there. And that does actually mean a lot to me. I think it also helps you all to be in that space, whether you realize it or not, to have those conversations with each other. There's all these people that care about our democracy and care about creating a more inclusive world. And I think that's pretty healing. That's kind of cheesy, but it's true. It does make a difference. And I think it matters for our representatives to hear directly from constituents. It made a difference. Some of them where there wasn't a constituent, I stepped in and went to the meeting myself. And I can tell you the conversation I had with my own representative was different from the conversation I had where I went to the district next to ours that didn't have somebody show up for lobby day. And that's not to make anybody feel bad at all. But your voices do matter. They like, and your faces matter. It's one of the most impactful things. Like, hey, I drove all this way on this specific day to show up for this issue because I really care. And by the way, here's a letter from like 10 of my friends who also care too. Like, you can up that ante. I'm just going to tell you right now. But so I would say on two levels. One, seeing your face and your care and your willingness to show up, but two, just honestly for all of us, like for me, for Stephanie, for John, for Carrie, who's done all that work. I think it does matter and helps us keep going.
And I think somebody probably already said that. Nilu talked about this early, but we want you there. We think you're really cool. And we're only here because you're here. We don't exist without you, literally. So yeah, lobby day is definitely important. Thank you. I think on that note, I would just love to talk a little bit more about political organizing. A lot of stalwart FairVote Washington supporters know a lot about this piece of going into fairs and festivals and marketplaces to have these human connection conversations. But then that extra twist, that extra pinch for political organizing is just a bit different. And I'd love to get some ideas from Stephanie about what your definition of political organizing is and why do we need it?
It's a really good question. This is and like John and Nilu have said, this is and I think you said it too, Gary, this is a political issue. We're trying to get a bill passed. Our bill is the best bill, and that's good for us. But in the end, we're trying to convince people to vote for this thing. And as I have said countless times, right now, the only way to win is to get more votes than the other guy. So we gotta do it. We gotta play the game as it is right now. Something that last question reminded me of, but also something John mentioned earlier, is in the end, there are different things that will work on different people. So perhaps someone is immune to 20 people showing up in their office. I don't know that legislator. I don't want to know that legislator. But maybe they're really energized by an endorsement. Okay, so that's one. And maybe someone's really energized by door knocking. Okay, great. There's another one. And it's the same thing when volunteers are out having what I would consider recruitment conversations. That's like, okay, like some folks are really like, they go to a fair. We have found some great volunteers. We found them by them walking up to us and saying, I'm here and I am interested. And that's great. That is also good. I think of a political organizing program as expanding that so that we reach more supporters, so that we can grow things like Lobby Day, and also so that maybe I'm not an effective messenger when I go sit in somebody's office because they're not my legislator. I'm just an advocate and they don't really care about me, but maybe we just need to keep going and finding those other people. So I also have been the organizer who makes 200 dials a day, has 10 conversations, and one of them gets me 40 doors that weekend. And wow, that is exhausting and really, really hard. But I wouldn't have gotten those 40 doors. And by the way, that one volunteer who showed up on Saturday, they brought a friend, or they showed up the next weekend too. That's like, this is really, it can be very slow work, but we have to try a bunch of different things because that's the only way to keep building. We can't keep going back to the same group and saying, well, we were here before and we hope that now there are new people here. We can do that. We also have to expand. I don't know if that quite answered your question, Carrie. So if you want me to get a little more detailed, I can, but that's my
No,
feeling.
I liked it. I liked it. Thank you. And I'm seeing Nilu taking notes. So Nilu, does that mean you have questions?
I'm
Sometimes
looking at future questions. I'm
we're
notes. You guys should know that by now.
we're multitasking. Like Nilu has something really important to say. Sorry to put you on the spot. But Nilu, I think I do have a question that I think you would be really apt to answer. We got a message from Scott Chaplin saying that he is a former county chair for the Democrats, and he's had some like really negative feedback from voters and not who don't want to vote for Democrats at all with the way our presidential administration is handling some foreign conflicts. And he is wondering if we're finding any similar sentiments around the state, or I think in our conversations, like, and to paraphrase the question, I think I'd ask, like, are people maybe being a little disenchanted with our party systems?
Well, that's what I was taking notes on. You know, I think it's a really hard question. I think people are feeling lots of emotions right now. I mentioned I'm Iranian American, and I got a very beautiful text from a Jewish neighbor of mine. Actually ran for office last year, and I was knocking doors. She's a woman in the neighborhood that I'd knocked doors on, and we had a great conversation last year or whatever it was about Dungeons and Dragons and creating like a Hebrew world. It was awesome. I sent it to a friend who's a rabbi. But what she wrote to me about today was like, how are you feeling and how's it going? And she's just confused about the whole political process. And I really think what I'm hearing most from everyone is just a lot of pain and a lot of fear. And also just real exhaustion with not being able to center the conversation, the priorities, and really breaking into the polarization that our voting system does, that says we got to hate each other. Like the root of this is that you are evil or you're a bad guy. It's not actually the conversation about about around solutions, you know, around making things better. Like our focus ends up being the other guy's got to be a bad guy because how could they possibly vote, when we're split in this way? And I think that is actually like breaking a lot of hearts and creating a lot of pain, especially as this goes on and the conversations become more and more like difficult. and our voting system doesn't allow us to reflect that. And the other thing is that people are tired of spoilers. They just want to feel safe from people reflecting their priorities. I mean, people want to reflect their real vote and their priorities, and that should be okay without somebody else coming and saying, well, you want this person to win, or you want this person to win, or you want to do this to me, or you want to do that to me. It's like, actually, I just want to vote for what I believe in or how I feel. And I think that should be okay too. And it makes me really sad when we are attacking each other simply because somebody's voting some way, or attacking a candidate for running. Like, that's just kind of messed up. It's like, why did so many Democrats run in the, Commissioner of Public Lands race? Why did so many Democrats run in the county commissioner's race? That's not people's fault, and that extends all the way to the presidential level. Like, that should not be our conversation, that people shouldn't be running like that. You know what? We should only be a two-party system. That's the only way. And I'm like, okay, then we really just sit and hate each other. Like, is that really what you want? Because that just isn't. And so I think that's really what's I'm feeling is going on, is like people want to be able to safely reflect their priorities and their wishes, so it gets communicated to our legislators, like John mentioned earlier. Like, there has to be a way to say what we care about. And there has to be a way where we where we can talk about issues and not talk about candidates as though they're like, that's like part of us that we're talking about. Like, who's evil, who's not. And I'm honestly and truly exhausted by it as someone who cares about people. I mean, there's no way that like I could say that like my favorite part of lobby day is seeing your beautiful faces, and like that gives me energy and spirit, and then being like, actually, I feel like hating half the country. Like, that just doesn't work for me. And I don't think that's working for anybody. And so I really do invite people to really push hard to bring ranked choice voting for so many reasons. And this is, yes, one of them. And I have heard that. And I thank you, Scott, for the question, because it's a challenging question this time. And I'm glad I got some time to write a few notes.
Well, thanks for letting me put you on the spot. I'm glad I was right. That I think you had a really good answer. So thank you. We are coming close to our time, so I have what I think will be an easy question for all three of you, and then one extra fun one for Stephanie. All right, so I'm gonna start with John, and all three of you are gonna get the same question, so the rest of you get some extra time. What are some elections nationwide that you're really excited about or keeping your eye on? And I'm gonna take the presidential election out of it because it's too easy.
Yeah. Well, there's this presidential election that's happening. I don't know if you heard about that. I mean, obviously, like Stephanie working in Idaho is super important work. There's a ton of ranked choice voting stuff on the ballot across the country, not here, but very critical to our work. It's going to make our work much easier if we have examples. Portland's going to run ranked choice voting. Stephanie can help me with this for the first time, right? So we'll literally have another example of how well it can work. I mean, we've seen it in Minneapolis and New York and Alaska. That really helps in our work. So everybody should be watching those races very, very closely. I think the other kind of races that, unfortunately, we're kind of looking toward, it's sort of what Nilu was saying, is just where it's not working, where voters just feel frustrated and disenfranchised. And, when you get to kind of two parties without much ranked choice voting, it can feel so limiting and so like, I mean, I don't know if there's any candidate out there that I agree with 100%, right? Which is okay. That we're not in cults, It's like whichever party we're in, it's like it's okay not to agree with folks and sort of pick the lesser of two evils, especially in this system. But there is a better system where we would. I'm not saying that this solves every problem, American democracy, but it would solve a bunch of them. So I'm hoping that we see some very positive things, that the system that's going now, that people continue to say that this isn't working the way that it should, that there's many other places around the country and around the world where the system's working a lot better.
Absolutely. All right, Stephanie, I'm going to come to you next, since you get a bonus question.
Okay. I'm looking at some of these Senate races that have been unpredictable. I think that Montana is going to be really, really interesting to see. But again, and Wisconsin as well. Like, man, Tammy Baldwin, what a leader in so many ways. What a gift to this country, and I hope she gets to keep her seat. And Ohio, right? We've got a Democratic Senator, Sherrod Brown, trying to hold on to that seat in what is fast becoming a very red state. What's cool about these three races, though, is that these are representatives who really and truly care what their voters have to say. And again, this comes back to what I was saying before, because they have to. They are incentivized to. In other places, that's not the case. They really have to listen. John Tester's got to listen. Tammy Baldwin's got to listen. Because their races are coming down to such thin margins. And like Nilu was saying, that just makes you dig in more as a voter. Like, and that's just it becomes emotional. And let's vote on policy. And these guys have to run on policy. They have to do that because they have to speak to so many voters. So I'm interested in those three Senate races specifically. And by interested, I mean, I'm very worried and they are keeping me up at night.
Very fair. All right, Nilu, are there any races you're keeping an eye on?
Not going to throw out a specific race. There are races I'm keeping an eye on for sure. All of our endorsed candidates, and but also I am really excited for Portland. They're going to do proportional representation, ranked choice voting, multi-winner district. It's a really big deal, and I wish Portland so much success. You know, I think it'll be pretty meaningful for us. So if people have questions about that, feel free to write in because it is pretty cool. I'm also going to say I'm jealous of Stephanie's question.
Oh, well, I think you could also answer it. This one was just specifically directed at her by Daniel Weiss, who is actually not here anymore, but I just thought it was a good question. Stephanie, what are your favorite cookbooks?
Oh, is that okay? I was going to say, I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, I don't see anything there. Okay. So my favorites are usually anything by America's Test Kitchen, because like I really want, like I said, I want to know the system, right? Like, why is this going to turn out the way it is? And I also have taken to doing what I like to think of as the opposite of doom scrolling, which is the New York Times cooking app. You can it's endless recipes and they're all beautifully photographed, and I'm going to make 1% of them. And I'm very comfortable living in that world, but I get a lot more joy out of that than I do from looking at X or Twitter or whatever the hell it's called now. So that's where I liked, and also the silver palette. I mean, I like, my mom raised me on that. Like so I'm very attached to that one as well. Good question. Thank you. I was very confused.
I know that was very cryptic of me. I apologize. I really wanted to build the suspense. We are now 1 minute over, so I want to give everybody back their evening. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us tonight. I am just going to make one shout out that there was somebody who commented and let us know about a canvas they had coming up for Terry Niles this Saturday. This part won't age well in the webinar, but that's okay. Saturday, October 26th at 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. There's going to be some work going on for Terry Niles. So she is one of our endorsed candidates, by the way, which is why it feels right for me to bring it up. Passing it along. Thank you all so much for spending some of your Tuesday with us. Thank you to Stephanie and to John and to Nilu for your expertise and your hope and your skill set to bring forward these ideas into reality. We're very lucky to work with you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night.